Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlegger shills, desolate sirs, peasants, vassals, popes, Catholics. I'm a useful idiot. Today I'd like to talk about the Pope resigning, Pope Benedict resigning. And, of course, it's a big deal because it's the first time a Pope has resigned in 600 years, and it's pretty dramatic. And there's a lot of mystery surrounding it. And at first I just thought it was something of note for the church. But this story actually gets a little more interesting. And because as it turns out, there's 3 stories going on here. And it gets pretty wild. So now this is becoming pretty intriguing to me and something to watch. So now we're going to be on Pope watch. And so the first thing that we have happen is the Pope resigning. And he's going to be living in some quarters within the Vatican, squirreled away there. But now there apparently is a document that's come out, supposedly from a group called the International Tribunal in Crimes of Church and State, based in Brussels. And theoretically, they're representing a European government that has issued an arrest warrant for Ratzinger, Pope Benedict, and is putting a lien against Vatican assets. And supposedly the charges are crimes against humanity and ordering a criminal conspiracy. And this involves criminal activities at the Vatican Bank. And there's been a lot of very sinister things going on over the Vatican Bank recently, but that's another topic for another video. And then also the aid in protecting a network of child molestation, child torture, and child trafficking. And there seems to be a lot more documentation of this around, certainly within the Catholic Church and all the cover-ups. And that was certainly bad enough. But now there seems to be some kind of indication that Pope Benedict himself is involved in this. I did a video before about a girl who says that she was used as a sex slave in Vatican sex parties. And I did a video basically talking about a guy that was involved in that who supposedly did 40,000 exorcisms. So anyway, so that's another strange thing. So I don't know how to confirm this document. It seems a little vague and a little fishy, so it could be a hoax. But there's someone who's suggesting that's the reason why he so suddenly resigned. And I have no doubt that there is some strange sub-party, subculture going on in the Vatican, because after all, this is just like all the other seats of power around the world, states. The Vatican is a seat of power, and therefore these are humans. They are subject to the same corruption, fraud, and lasciviousness that other high-ranking officials are subject to. Only they're even more insulated from any kind of prosecution. And the Vatican, of course, is one of the world's largest landowners as well, aside from having a massive amount of wealth and certainly a massive amount of assets, if nothing alone, their art collection. So anyway, there we have that. So I just wanted to throw that out there because an interesting possibility to be sure. And then another part of this that's come up recently, and my hat tip to Deb Truth for sending me this. Apparently there is a historic agreement between the Vatican and Israel, and that the Pope will now have a seat, granted official seat in a room where the Last Supper is believed to have taken place on Mount Zion in Jerusalem, where David and Solomon and other Judeo kings are supposedly buried. And an interesting agreement, because of course there's been clashes between Israel and the Vatican over the years, because they're all fighting over the same religious sites, and accusations that Christians are desecrating Jewish holy sites, and vice versa. So, apparently, at least based on this article in what appears to be a pretty right-wing Israeli newspaper, they're worried about millions of Christian pilgrims coming to Jerusalem. And there certainly is no love lost between the Vatican and Jews. They have a long history, including the fact that the Vatican did little to help Jews being persecuted in Germany during World War II, and in fact supposedly were involved in squirreling away Jewish assets en route to Switzerland. So anyway, and apparently the Israelis are also a little upset that because they accuse the Vatican of now using, quote, the state of Palestine, unquote, in its documents. And certainly that's enough to rile up the Israelis. But so anyway, there's this new agreement, and I don't know if it ties in at all, but it's an interesting development nonetheless. And it once again shows that there's no love lost between Christians and Jews generally. Certainly in the United States, they are very have a very good relationship, but the Israeli state itself has a much different attitude towards Christians, and I think American Christians need to take note of that. But now I've gone through the first two stories, but here's the third story, and this is where it gets really, really interesting. And once again, my hat tip to Dead Truth for sending me this information. And it's an Irish mystic from the 11th century, St Malachy. And he had a prophecy when he visited Rome. And he talked about that there would be 112 popes, and then it would end. And the last and final pope would just be just before the end of days. So, of course, this has a lot of meaning for Catholics, and there's a lot of anxiety out there now. And that's because Pope Benedict was the 111th Pope. So we are now coming up the 112th Pope, and according to St Malachy, this will be the last final Pope. And in fact, his prophecy goes on to talk about, and this is a quote, the seven-hilled city will be destroyed. That's Rome. And the formidable judge will judge his people. The end. Unquote. So, pretty foreboding. So what he did in his visions is he had 111 Latin phrases that were supposed to represent each of the 111 popes. And he seemed to be quite accurate, as it turns out. Two examples are Pope John Paul II. His parable, according to St Malachy, was the sun's eclipse. Well, as it turns out, Pope John Paul II was born on an eclipse and entombed during an eclipse. And St Malachy knew that that pope was the sun's eclipse back in the 11th century. And he also talked about the 111th pope would be the glory of the olive. Well, when Ratzinger became pope, he picked Pope Benedict as his name, well, representing the Benedictine monks. And what's the symbol for the Benedictine monks? Yes, the olive. So Malachi is not somebody to brush off lightly, but one could interpret the fact that let's look at the fact that we may have a case of the church being under litigation. Is that true? Is this document true that we have an international tribunal that's accusing the Vatican and the Pope with crimes against humanity? I find that very difficult to believe. The connections between the aristocracy and the Vatican and the European elites, I would imagine would be too tight. It's hard for me to imagine something like this happening. But let's just say that maybe that is what's happening, and is St. Malachy's prediction having more to do with the end of the Roman Catholic Church as we know it? Is it going to go down in some sort of disreputable scandal and basically come to some semi-existence? That's also a scenario that's hard to imagine. And not being of the Christian faith myself, I'm a Taoist, so I have a different view on things. But that said, I do get a great deal of meaning out of a lot of Christian scripture, and I'm actually more familiar with it than a lot of Christians. And so to look at St. Malachy's prediction, in light of everything else that's going on, and the very fact that St. Benedict has resigned, and we look around at what's happening in the world, it's hard not to put this all together and make one pause for thought. And that's certainly what I'm doing. And to suggest that this is the end of times, and once again, it could be a metaphor. These ideas of a great judgment, maybe there's going to be a global revolution of some sort. There's a lot of ways to interpret it. I don't necessarily see divine intervention and the rapture and the judgment of all people on earth. But then again, when you're talking about some guy from the 11th century calling shots like these, it's a little interesting. But I'm just going to keep my eyes open and see who the next pope is. According to St Malachy, it's going to be Peter the Roman. So if the next pope decides to call himself Pope Peter, I'm going to be a little more nervous. And if it's an Italian pope, Peter the Roman, I'll be a little more nervous. And if it turns out that he seems like a real bad guy, I'm going to be very, very nervous. So anyway, there's an update. And wow, all right, Pope Benedict. Going to be really curious to see who follows you up. And then, of course, there's predictions about a black pope as well. And if anybody has any information about the prophecies of Armageddon and the black pope, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.